March 24, 1945, 27,000 feet above Berlin. Hauptmann Franz Stigler watched through his gun sight as American B-17 formations approached the Daimler-Benz tank factory. His Messerschmitt Bf-109 G-14 was one of 40 fighters scrambled to intercept. The mathematics were simple. 40 German fighters against perhaps 100 bombers. If they could break through the escort screen, they could destroy 20, maybe 30 heavy bombers in a single pass. Enough to make the Americans reconsider their daylight bombing campaign. Then Stigler saw them. Red-tailed P-51 Mustangs. Dozens of them positioned in a defensive formation he'd never encountered before. 3 layers of protection. Close escort weaving directly above the bombers, medium escort ready to intercept, and high escort watching for diving attacks. The coordination was flawless. More disturbing was something his wingman reported over the radio. Those are the Black Birdmen, Schwarze Vogelmenschen. They don't leave their bombers, ever. Stigler had heard the stories. American Negro pilots flying red-tailed Mustangs who stayed with their bombers no matter what, who refused to chase easy kills, who flew with a discipline that made them impossible to draw away from their charges. He dismissed it as propaganda. Surely the Americans wouldn't trust their most expensive aircraft to racially inferior pilots. Yet here they were, and as Stigler watched, he realized the stories had undersold their capability. What Hauptmann Stigler didn't know was that he was witnessing the culmination of a 4-year transformation. From April 1943, when the 99th Fighter Squadron arrived in North Africa, flying obsolete P-40 Warhawks, to this moment over Berlin in March 1945, with the 332nd Fighter Group flying America's finest fighters. The men in those red-tailed Mustangs had traveled an impossible distance. Not just the 1,600 miles from their base at Ramitelli, Italy, but from a nation that believed them incapable of flying combat aircraft to the moment when German fighter pilots specifically avoided engagements with them. The transformation began not with bullets, but with prejudice. In 1925, the United States Army War College had published an official assessment stating that Negroes were of inferior mentality and weak in character, inherently unsuited for technical military roles. This wasn't backwoods racism. This was official United States military doctrine, printed and distributed, taught to every officer who would later command American forces in World War II. When war came to America in December 1941, the Army Air Forces had exactly 0 black pilots. Not because black Americans hadn't tried. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in World War I because America rejected him. Bessie Coleman earned her pilot's license in France in 1921, when no American flight school would accept her. By 1941, dozens of black Americans held civilian pilot licenses, having learned to fly despite systematic exclusion from military and commercial aviation. Political pressure finally cracked the door open. Civil rights leaders, black newspapers, and the need for northern black votes in the 1940 election forced President Roosevelt's hand. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. The announcement came with a caveat that revealed military expectations. This would be an experiment to test whether Negroes could be trained as combat pilots. The word experiment carried weight. This wasn't opportunity. It was a test designed to confirm existing prejudices. When the first cadets arrived at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama, they entered a program specifically designed to prove them unworthy. The washout rate was deliberately set at 60% compared to 40% for white cadets. Training hours exceeded standard requirements by 50%. Standards were raised every time black cadets met them. Yet they persisted, and by July 1942, the first 5 pilots earned their wings. Captain Benjamin Davis, Jr., son of America's first black general, led them. What the Germans would discover over the next 3 years was that this discriminatory training had created something unexpected. By demanding perfection from black pilots while accepting adequacy from white pilots, the Army Air Forces had inadvertently produced a super-selected group. Only the very best survived Tuskegee. Those who made it through were harder, sharper, and more disciplined than their white counterparts. The prejudice designed to exclude them had forged them into elite pilots. The 99th Fighter Squadron arrived in North Africa in April 1943, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Their commander, Colonel William Momia, made no secret of his skepticism about black pilots. He assigned them patrol missions away from real action, hoping they would fail. When they didn't immediately excel, he filed a report claiming they lacked aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The report reached General Henry Arnold, who prepared to end the experiment. Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, 15 pilots of the 99th Flying Obsolete P-40Zs encountered superior Focke-Wulf 190Zs over the Anzio beachhead during a massive Luftwaffe raid. What followed silenced every critic. The 99th shot down 12 enemy aircraft in 2 days. Flying inferior equipment, they had destroyed more German planes than they had in their previous 7 months of combat. The War Department's subsequent study comparing the 99th with other P-40 squadrons concluded they were performing as well as any unit in theater. In May 1944, the expanded 332nd Fighter Group received orders that would transform them from outcasts to legends. They would join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts, flying the long, dangerous missions deep into Nazi Germany. Colonel Davis gathered his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast. "We cannot afford to lose bombers," he told them. "Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." This directive defined their combat philosophy and would create their legendary reputation. Stay with the bombers no matter what. Never chase enemy fighters for easy kills. Never abandon your post for personal glory. In June 1944, the 332nd received distinctive markings. Entire tail sections painted crimson red. The red tails were born. German intelligence files captured after the war revealed that Luftwaffe pilots knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs. They developed tactics specifically to counter the 332nd's protective formations. Draw them away with small fighter groups while the main force attacked from another direction. It rarely worked. The red-tails refused to take the bait. They stayed with the bombers. By summer 1944, American bomber crews were requesting the red tails by name. These men, who faced death on every mission, cared nothing about race, only survival. They noticed that bombers escorted by red-tailed Mustangs came home more often. Statistics supported their observations. Research by Air Force historians would later reveal that bombers under 332nd Fighter Group Escort lost 27 aircraft to enemy fighters. The average for other P-51 groups of the 15th Air Force was 46, nearly half the loss rate. This superior protection occurred despite the red tails flying some of the longest and most dangerous missions of the war. Berlin, Munich, Vienna, the Ploesti oil fields, targets deep in the Reich where German fighter opposition was fiercest. The 332nd's mission on March 24, 1945, epitomized their capability. 1,600 miles round trip to Berlin, escorting bombers against the Daimler-Benz tank factory defended by Germany's new jet fighters. Hauptmann Steigler watched that day as the Red Tails engaged Messerschmitt Me-262 jets, the world's first operational jet fighters with a top speed of 540 miles per hour. 3 of those jets fell to the Red Tails' guns. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown pulled up in a 15-degree climb and fired 3 long bursts at a Me-262 from 2,000 feet. The pilot bailed out. Lieutenant Earl Lane shot down a jet with a 2,000-yard deflection shot that most pilots wouldn't attempt. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third jet victory. The destruction of 3 Me-262s in a single engagement represented more jets than most fighter groups would destroy in the entire war. Yet what impressed Stigler more than the kills was what happened next. After destroying the jets, the Red Tails returned to bomber formation. They didn't pursue fleeing Germans. They didn't hunt for more victories. They went back to their bombers and brought them home. German pilots reported this behavior to intelligence officers who couldn't comprehend it. Fighter pilots were supposed to seek glory through aerial victories. The natural instinct was to chase a fleeing enemy. Yet these American Negro pilots consistently suppressed that instinct in favor of mission discipline. It violated German understanding of human nature and military behavior. What the Germans didn't understand was the weight these pilots carried. Every mission was a referendum on their race's capability. Every bomber lost would be blamed on their incompetence. Every mistake would justify segregation. They flew not just for America, but for 13 million Black Americans denied equal rights. That burden created a discipline white pilots never needed. The statistics compiled by War's End told an irrefutable story. The 332nd Fighter Group flew 179 bomber escort missions, 15,000 individual sorties, destroyed 112 enemy aircraft in aerial combat and 150 on the ground. They earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation, and the respect of every bomber crew they protected. Their loss rate for bombers under escort was significantly lower than other fighter groups. Nazi racial ideology classified black people as Untermenschen, subhumans incapable of mastering complex technology or demonstrating martial virtue. Yet here was mathematical proof of the opposite. Black pilots in American fighters were providing superior bomber protection than white pilots. They were shooting down German jets. They were executing coordinated formations that impressed enemy observers. The evidence demolished the ideology. After Germany's surrender, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided testimony about the Red Tails. Several mentioned the nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, Black Birdmen. They described the distinctive Red Tails, the disciplined formations, the refusal to abandon bombers. One pilot reportedly stated, "We learned to avoid the Red Tails. They were protecting those bombers with their lives." The transformation from prejudice to respect wasn't complete or universal. Many Luftwaffe pilots never learned who flew the red-tailed Mustangs, but those who engaged them repeatedly developed grudging respect for pilots they'd been taught were racially inferior. Combat had a way of exposing the truth. Skill in aerial warfare transcended ideology. The Tuskegee Airmen returned to a segregated America that often didn't know they existed. Their achievements were documented in black newspapers, but minimized or ignored by mainstream press. White Americans remained largely unaware that black pilots had flown combat missions. The irony was profound. German enemies knew who they were while their own countrymen didn't. Recognition came slowly. In 1948, President Harry Truman integrated the United States military, influenced partly by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat record. Benjamin Davis became the Air Force's first black general in 1954, but full acknowledgement of their achievements took 60 years. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend. The claim that the Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber became mythology, slightly exaggerated from the truth that they lost fewer bombers than other groups. The real story needed no embellishment. They had proven that excellence in combat aviation transcended race. They had demolished both Nazi ideology and American segregation through undeniable performance. They had transformed from objects of prejudice to legends through discipline, skill, and sacrifice. Hauptmann Franz Stigler survived the war and lived until 2008. In interviews late in life, he spoke about various combat experiences, but specifically mentioned the day he watched red-tailed Mustangs destroy 3 German jets over Berlin. "I knew then that the war was truly lost," he stated. "Not because of those 3 jets, but because it proved the Americans were putting their best pilots on their most important missions. Those were exceptional pilots. Their race meant nothing in combat. Only skill mattered." The Tuskegee Airmen had fought 3 wars simultaneously. Against the Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe. Against Nazi racial ideology through performance. Against American segregation through excellence. They won all 3. The red-tailed Mustangs that Hauptmann Stigler learned to avoid represented more than American air power. They represented the bankruptcy of racial theories, the power of opportunity, and the triumph of capability over prejudice. The Black Birdmen had earned their place in history through the only currency that mattered in combat, bringing their bombers home.